So in this video, we are going to work on making a spout with hand-built techniques rather than throwing. And we're doing that with a slab that I rolled out. This one is a 1/4 inch thick. You might want it thinner or thicker depending on the thickness of the pot that you're using this for, the teapot. This is a spout former, and this is a spout former. They have different shapes. Obviously this one is double-sided. It widens out faster. This one is thinner, widens out more slowly. And remembering, when you do something that is conical, it rolls. It not going to be a straight line like this. It's going to roll around. So the type of slab you need is going to be different depending on what you're using. I'm going to use this one that's a bit straighter, so I won't have as much of that roll, but I'll have some of it. So I'm going to actually start on this side so you can see what I'm doing. So if I start over here and I line up my spout where I want it, I'm going to start rolling this slab around. And let it touch. And when it touches, I need to then cut this in such a way that I know I'm going to have some extra clay to attach it. So I'm going to cut it at sort of an angle, give it some extra room. I can always trim it up so I have extra there. Now, what I didn't mention earlier is that before you use these spout formers, you need to make sure they're clean. You get any crusty stuff off of it. You'll probably need to do that with a damp sponge. Not a wet sponge. You don't want to soak these with water. Just damp enough to get it off, and then unfortunately you won't be able to use it right away. You're going to have to let this dry. If you don't let this dry, the clay is just going to stick to it and it will not be helpful to you. So unfortunately, if it's dirty when you get to it, you're going to have to clean it off. So now I've got my piece. I've got extra clay here. I have a little bit of a fold here from what I was doing before, so I'm just going to fix that real quick before we do this. Okay. So this is the clay I'm going to use. I'm going to get all this other clay out of my way. And before I seal this up, I am going to unroll this and I'm going to put cornstarch on the inside of my clay. So there's this bowl in the studio. Obviously it's a little bit awkward with pandemic stuff. You can't really sanitize this, so just make sure you wash your hands well after you use it. So I'm putting a decent amount of cornstarch in here. I want to avoid getting cornstarch on the places where I'm going to actually be attaching, because I don't want to get that in there. And if I do, I can take a sponge or a rib and wipe away that extra cornstarch before I attach it. We want to avoid using excess water in this because water is going to make the wood stick to the clay, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So I'm going to set this in here and I'm going to roll it back up, and I'm going to stop before it's quite touching. And I need to remove a little bit more of that cornstarch. And I'm going to slip and score. If I can find my scoring tool. There it is. So I'm going to slip and score on this lip here. You can see the inside lip here. I'm going to slip and score here. and I'm going to use water. And again, I don't want to use an excessive amount of water here because I don't want to get the wood wet. Just using enough. And again, we'll score the other direction. And score the other direction. And I'm going to squish this in. I'm going to roll it in so that that connection gets nice and tight. And I don't want to grip so hard that I dent the clay and thin it out, but I want to make sure it's connected. And now I've got this piece that obviously has some extra clay on it, and I'm going to take it and cut away what I don't need. Obviously I don't want to make a thin spot, so I want to be careful that I'm cutting at the angle that the clay is going at. Okay, so that's much closer to what I need, and I'm going to do a little bit of compressing with my finger to get that down. I can grab a soft rib, so these red ribs that are in the cabinet are really good for this. So I want to start to compress that, get it nice and even. Alright, I've got that sealed up. I can go around this and kind of compress. And before I do anything else, I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to level out my ends so I have a flat place for this to sit. I'm not going to worry about the front of it because that's going to get stretched out anyway, but I can cut the back side, make sure that's level. Before I do anything else, I want to make sure I've got more, this isn't stuck, so this isn't stuck, that's good. I'm going to add some cornstarch in here just to double, triple check that it's not going to get stuck when I do that. So I'm just sort of doing it in there. You can also put it on the stick itself, especially if you have any damp spots you're worried about. And I'm going to slide this back on. And now it's going to be sort of like pulling a handle. So I'm going to take water. I'm going to take my bucket over here. And I'm going to use water, and it's got to stay on, which is good, it's not stuck. And I'm going to start pulling this out. What it does is sort of stretches out that clay, makes it feel a little bit more organic if you want to use it that way. It also thins out the clay if that's what you're looking for. This isn't ideal to do over this drywall board. I wouldn't do this generally over the drywall board. I do it over the bucket, but I want you to be able to see what I'm doing here. So it's very much like pulling a handle, just at a larger scale. You can see it sort of stretching out. It also sort of forms a little bit better to the wooden form when you do this. And you can actually stretch this pretty far depending on how thick your slab is. Okay, so when you're happy with the form that you have, you definitely want to go back and recompress it and get any of that really wet slip off. You can see I'm kind of pulling the wet stuff off the top of the outside of that. And you could get it way thinner than this if that's what you need. I'm going to dry off my hands, clean off my hands, and before I take this off, I'm going to trim the end of it. You can see it's still pretty wet. I would need to get some more of that wet stuff off. But I can trim off that end, and then if my hands are dry, I should be able to take this off without marring the surface too much, and it didn't stick. And you might have to retrim your end, your thick end too, so it can stand up. But now I've got what could be a really good spout for a larger teapot. I could trim it down so that it's just a smaller piece. You also can take this opportunity when you use a spout former to then bend your spout. You know, if I want my spout to have a nice curve to it, I can start to bend it over. You know, there's a lot of teapots that have spouts that have sort of arms that go out like that, and so this is a good opportunity to do that, depending on the curve you want to get or the shaping. Or you could then go in and use this as just like a blank tube that's slightly tapered to make something else completely or make a different form. So there is making a spout with the spout former. Obviously you'd want to do clean up. This one's still pretty thick at the edge, so you'd want to take an implement and thin that down, get it nice and sharp and clean so that your liquid is going to flow well.